You're listening to the Pens Nation radio show on thepensnation.com. Follow us on Twitter at @thepensnation.
Hey everyone, you're listening to the Pens Nation radio show, which is not really a radio show, so I'm not sure why we still call it that. But I hope you enjoy this podcast whenever you listen to it. My name is Mish. You can follow me at HockeyMish on Twitter. I'm joined by Casey Johnston, who is running the board and trying to figure everything out as he does this for the second time in his life. You can follow him at Pens Nation Casey. And we are also joined by Ryan Wilson, our guest from Hockey Buzz. You can follow him at Gunnar Stahl, which is Staal, which Casey just learned 2 minutes ago.
And if the other Gunnar Stahl accepts my phone call, we might have a special guest.
Ooh, that might be long-distance charges, though.
I assume he would be in Iceland, right?
Yes.
That'd be a pretty awesome guest to have.
Hopefully Nick's paying for it.
We should look into that. We should try and get him as a guest. I know on the Hockey Writers someone did an interview with him recently, so I bet he's accessible. Maybe we can see what he thinks about the Penguins GM situation. For now, though, we will settle for Ryan Wilson. I hope you guys are okay with it. Most of today's talk is probably just going to be GM and coaching stuff, because I think that's all we've discussed for the last few days, and we can finally get a podcast on it now. So let's start there. As everyone knows, Dan Bilesma is gone. It took 3 weeks, but we kind of all knew he would be fired. And shockingly, Jason Botterill is still around, but not the actual GM, because Jim Rutherford is the actual GM. Bill Guerin and Tom Fitzgerald are now assistant GMs as well. So you have Rutherford as GM, Botterill as associate GM, Guerin and Fitzgerald as assistant GMs. It's a weird hierarchy, but it seems to be one that a lot of teams are moving towards now. Just adding more and more hockey minds into management, which, I mean, why would you get rid of a good hockey mind if you don't have to? So let's just start with the overall hierarchy. And Ryan, what do you think about each guy?
Well, I was a little surprised that they went with Rutherford. I thought that they would go with either Botterill or Brisebois and just kind of skip over the whole retread thing. Personally, I think they could have done that, but my biggest fear was losing Jason Botterill to this process, because I do think highly of him, but having him around in that associate role, and with Rutherford in his press conference stating that he's going to be heavily leaned on, I do feel a little bit better about it, but I do still think it's kind of an unnecessary hire for Rutherford.
Yeah, I think you and I had very similar reactions right off the bat, because, well, I know I was just, before we even knew anything about Botterill and we saw Rutherford was getting hired, I knew I was angry. It seemed like most of Twitter was angry at that point. I knew you weren't pleased with it either. No. It just seemed like a very weird way of going about things, and I still don't know how I feel about Botterill as an associate GM, because, as you said, it seems like he's ready for the job, and I don't know if Rutherford's really necessary. So, I mean, how do you see this playing out over the next 2 to 3 years? Do you think Botterill really needs that long to take over?
No. But as long as they're leaning on him and he's making the decisions, I don't really care who goes to the podium to announce them.
So, are you basically seeing Rutherford as kind of a figurehead here?
I'm hoping.
Well, there's some optimism there, so I guess we'll take that.
What's an associate GM? That's the title that confused me.
It's when you try to keep a guy around when you don't award him the position.
Yeah, it pretty much amounts to seemingly a pay raise and almost like sharing the same office as Rutherford, as they will both be in on like the day-to-days, like the exact same decisions on everything. And that's what Rutherford said in the press conference, that Botterill basically will be by his side for literally everything he does. So, I mean, it's almost like having a co-GM. Botterill gets the pay raise over being assistant GM, but the Penguins don't lose him.
This is so confusing.
Yeah, that's what happens when you have an
not the
associate,
hierarchy of the Penguins. That's not confusing. Just the hire itself. Like hiring Jim Rutherford isn't good. It isn't bad. It's just confusing.
Well, I had the day it was announced, I had an emotional response. I wrote my emotional response, prefaced it as an emotional response, but a day later, more reasoned thought put in. I'm just happy that Botterill's been thrusted upwards in his power within the organization. Everybody knows about his cap genius, his sly moves to bury people in the ECHL for a few hours just to save enough space to make the proper roster moves. But James Myrtle had an article the other day that spoke to how Jason Botterill is one of the more progressive hockey minds coming up through with his statistical analysis, and to me that was very encouraging.
One thing I've been wondering about with Botterill lately is everyone in Pittsburgh has built him up quite a bit. We've talked about it, I guess, for the past 2 or 3 years. He's done a wonderful job with the cap. He really does every single year. And people have talked about how he's ready for a GM job. He's gone for interviews around the league. Everyone's kind of waiting to see when he will take over as the true GM of a team. And obviously that didn't happen in this situation. I've started to wonder if maybe the talk in Pittsburgh is a little overblown about what Botterill is capable of, either in terms of networking or in terms of just his day-to-day GM ability compared to being like a capologist, essentially. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that one encouraging sign is that if his thought process and philosophical views on hockey were similar to Ray Shero, he would have been shown the door. So there must be some kind of differentiation that the ownership saw to keep him around. So perhaps some of the things that Ray Shero did poorly, he will do better, or at least in his interview claim that he's going to try to do better in those areas.
Yeah, it'll certainly be interesting to see, especially when drafting. When we get to draft day, everyone's probably going to have an eye on that, which probably isn't the most fair thing in the world because it looks like where the Penguins are slotted in the first round, it's going to be very forward-heavy, and I don't know if Shero was still around, if he would have taken the defenseman in this spot anyways when it comes up, but everyone's going to be looking for a forward. Everyone's going to be eyeing up this draft very, very carefully. One of the other things I'm concerned about with Botterill is, so Rutherford in Carolina, he had Ron Francis there as the assistant GM. He had Ron Francis doing like the player liaison work and doing a lot of the side work, real close with the players essentially before he ended up taking over as GM, just a month ago. It seems like Bill Guerin is in that position now, and I've started to wonder also, are the Penguins kind of in a situation where Jason Botterill still might leave in a year because someone's offering him a GM position, and where Bill Guerin might end up just taking over for Rutherford, kind of like what Ron Francis did this year?
Boy, that's an interesting look at it, and it may explain the hierarchy. Perhaps Botterill will be Rutherford's right-hand man for this first year, and if they like what they see, they'll just stick with it, promise him he'll be promoted. But maybe they don't like what he sees, and then they have Guerin in that role as a fallback. So maybe
how would you feel
their investment a little bit?
How would you feel about Billy Guerin? He's such a fan favorite that I kind of get worried that we don't look at him objectively anymore.
Do Pittsburgh fans look at anyone objectively?
We try to.
Because
at least
everyone's a fan favorite.
And I don't know. He's new to an NHL front office. There's really nothing there. At least Botterill. I mean, Botterill's been in the Penguins front office for 7 years, and seems like a smart enough guy. I mean, to do the cap stuff, you have to be smart. He played the game at a high level. In fact, his last few years professionally, he played in my backyard here, and he was a really good player. And if he didn't have concussions, he probably would have been an NHL guy. So I kind of like what Botterill brings. He's been a pretty decent player. He's got his MBA. He's got the experience in the front office. He's kind of attacking it at all angles, and that's kind of why I like him.
And then the last of the hierarchy of four now, I honestly don't know a lot about Tom Fitzgerald. I know about his playing career. I can tell you everything about his playing career. I don't know what to think of him management-wise. I've seen tweets talking about how he has been bad with player development and scouting. I've seen tweets that people love him in general, think he's a real smart mind and he's a good hockey mind. What can you say, basically, about Tom Fitzgerald? Educate me, if you will.
Casey, go ahead.
I know a little more than Mish, which is not saying a lot, because I know that he doesn't want to travel with the team. I read that somewhere. It's what has prevented him from taking a coaching position in the NHL in his post-playing career. He doesn't want to travel.
Is that like a family thing, or?
I think it's like a family thing. Yeah, he, was a player for a number of years. He's retired, and I think he just promised his wife he'd stay at home.
This is what I know about Tom Fitzgerald.